Star Wars Battlefront and Star Wars Battlefront 2 are games that defined my childhood. When I first played Star Wars Battlefront EA, it was a blast, but after a week the cracks had begun to show. It was restrictive, the gameplay was shallow, and the sequel has a long way to go to redeem itself. To this end, I went into the open beta for Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA with mixed feelings. I wanted to be impressed, but was preparing myself for disappointment. Now this is not a review, as I don't think it's really ever fair to review a beta build, but I am going to look at some of the challenges and weaknesses of this game's predecessor and address what has been changed to overcome them. And there has been some market improvements, but still some problems do remain. The new Battlefront games are not made for competitive play. The team sizes alone makes this very difficult. As such, Battlefront 2, much like its predecessor, relies on being relentless fun in the grand Star Wars setting. And because of this, it does rely heavily on gameplay that is both smooth and rewarding. For myself and many other players, we found that the gunplay in the first EA Star Wars game was left wanting. I know we are shooting lasers, but it seemed very much just about pointing the reticule and shooting from the hip. Players were punished by the aim assist if they aimed down the sights or used the first person view. In the beta, these things seem to have improved a fair bit. The various blasters in the beta felt like they could be used, well, like a gun, not like a super soaker. The recoil patterns were different, and the weapon ranges made more sense. The sniper weapons were actually viable in their own role, and the hitboxes seemed to be a good size too, which was not too forgiving, and aiming down sights also works just as well as firing from the hip. So on this front, the gunplay has been improved by a good margin from the last game. Something missing from EA's last Battlefront game was distinct classes between characters and soldiers. This was a staple of the original games and something that I really missed. Characters didn't feel that distinct without these classes, and the way you played was basically down to your choice of blaster rifle, which all fulfilled the same role except for a few sniper or shotgun-like weapons. The Battlefront 2 beta has lifted my hopes by including 4 distinct base classes: an assault, who uses an automatic rifle along with a limited time shotgun and grenades. There is a heavy class that uses an automatic weapon again, a rifle shield, and a minigun. There is the officer, who uses a pistol and can deploy turrets and buff teammates. Finally, my favourite class to use was the sniper, who can scout the battlefield with binoculars and go into a stealth ninja mode with a super powered burst rifle. On top of this, you can also spend points earned by shooting stuff to play as either a jump trooper, which is basically the same across all of the factions, or a unique unit, which unfortunately seemed pretty bland. The Wookiee Warrior class was awesome, but the Flame Trooper of the First Order and the Super Battle Droid didn't really feel that strong or interesting to use. This might just be a balance issue, so I don't want to judge it too much just yet. To me, all of this is a great improvement from the last game, but I think the classes need to be distinguished a little bit more. After a while of playing, most of the classes seem to basically do the same thing in very slightly different ways. Whereas in the Battlefront games from the last decade, we had engineers who specialised in repairing vehicles and supporting allies, or a heavy who could lay down mines and carried a rocket launcher as a default weapon. I also think that giving each class a distinct primary weapon and then a sidearm would have been a really good idea, because then you could include some really specialised primary guns, like some kind of ion launcher that only damages vehicles and ships, and then that class could still use its pistol sidearm to fight off infantry. Now I know that in Star Wars Battlefront EA we did have Fighter Squadron, but proper space battles were sorely missed. And now they are back, and they feel really good. These battles were perhaps my best experience from playing this beta. The ships were diverse, they had defined roles and handled really well. In addition, the Fondor map had lots of interesting surfaces to fly around, and it was far from just an open environment. The game objectives also seem to work really well here, although it will be interesting to see how this works in other space maps. I quickly fell in love with the TIE Bomber, with its multi-tracking missiles and its great damage against objective frigates. In this game mode, I really felt myself getting into that Star Wars feel. I felt like a fighter pilot zooming around the chaotic high-stakes battle. It felt good to take risks, to cut it close to the surfaces of terrain or enemy frigates as you line up for your bombing run. When you get the perfect position in behind an enemy, you just want to say classic lines out loud as you pull the trigger and unleash a barrage of laser fire. I have you now. It feels even better when you fly in cockpit view, really immersing you in the action, although this does make flying a little bit more difficult. Space combat was a definite highlight for me, and it did leave me craving a lot more of this kind of stuff. Now we are going to move from what was a highlight to something that actually left me quite disappointed. The way objectives work in this game, in both of the ground-based modes that we played, seemed very problematic. Let's start with the smaller game mode, which had one team trying to carry an objective to a location on the other side of the map before they run out of 100 respawn tickets. Not only was this painfully difficult for the attacking team, but it was also static and honestly got boring very quickly. The defenders spawned in a place which gave them a massive advantage, which added to that pain. Also, the team would never coordinate around the objective, and having only one item on the map that so many players on the map had to escort seemed just a bit silly. There needed to be more options with how to play the game, more than one way to deliver that objective. There needs to be more choice. Now for the larger galactic conquest upon Naboo, we had a different problem. Attackers had to escort their tank up a single large esplanade by killing defenders carrying ion cannons. And then you had to guard the ion cannons to stop the defenders picking them back up and using them to shoot. The action was incredibly linear, as all of the fighting essentially occurred along 3 straight lanes with little interconnection. The problem compounds itself in the following phase, in which the Republic defenders must hold 2 rooms with consoles that can open some doors. This means that from an incredibly large map, all of the fighting, every single player in the game has to engage each other through 4 tiny doorways. This kind of idea continues into the final phase of the mission, where every single player has to fight over a very small capture point in one room. Now unfortunately this is a pattern that had been repeated from the previous title. They make these wonderfully crafted enormous maps, and then they make everyone use a tiny fraction of them at a time. We need objective setups like in the original Battlefront 2, with command posts scattered around the map that you could spawn at, defend and capture. This makes use of the entire map, and justifies the huge 40-player lobbies. Take a look at Battlefield 3. I think this would have been a great game to model these new Battlefront games on. Honestly, I thought that the first EA Battlefront game would have worked better as a really in-depth and detailed Battlefield 3 mod or reskin. Give us the option to play on these large maps the way that we want, instead of just boxing us into these tiny areas and restricting other areas of the maps with turn-back timers. Also, destructible environments would have been awesome, but unfortunately that won't be happening this time around. So there are no more pickups for your vehicles or heroes, which is good, because that was a terrible system. Now you purchase the privilege of using a special fighter, class, hero or vehicle with points earned throughout the match as you complete objectives and kill enemies. This is indeed an improvement, however I still really think that the old Battlefront system of having the vehicles actually on the map and then you can get into them and you can get out of them and you can go and steal the enemy tanks was just so much more fun. It gave you many more options about how you want to play and really ramped up the fun factor. There's not much more to say here, as I think that I will have to wait to see the full suite of vehicles when the full game releases to pass my judgment. Now I could talk about all the free DLC, the microtransactions, the upgrade and progression system, and the single player and arcade functions, but to do these any justice I will have to wait for the full release because there wasn't that much about them in this beta. Therefore, in conclusion, I do want to make it very clear that I did have fun with this beta over the weekend. It is solid, it is good, but then again, that is exactly what the first EA Battlefront felt like before it became stale, and it became stale pretty quickly. I am fearful that this game will be another victim of what I call the Star Wars curse, that has plagued all recent Star Wars media, including the movies. Games, films, books, and comics are not good just because they are Star Wars. If that media is not good, enjoyable, well written, directed, or designed before you slap on that Star Wars logo, it will not become great afterwards just because it's now Star Wars. My problem is that if I stripped everything in this beta of its Star Wars-ness, it would be the same mechanics, gunplay, objectives, but just some generic sci-fi world with generic sci-fi music. I don't think it would herald a great game. Something solid maybe, but not something deep and worthy of greatness. Star Wars needs to stop relying on its name and its logo. It might work out for the marketing department, but these games and movies really need to stand on their own 2 feet, and I really hope that DICE and EA show that they understand this when they release Star Wars Battlefront 2 in full. Thank you so much for watching. Please join in the discussion in the comments. Remember, this was only my opinion, and I would love to hear what you thought of the beta as well. And please do not forget to subscribe if you want to see more content from us here at 4FS Gaming. Now, this is going to be a little bit cliche, but this is the first video I've made talking about Star Wars, so just for that, may the Force be with you.